Hi, welcome back to SEO On-Air. I'm your host Aaron, and today we have Don Elliot, CEO of Gravitate, join us. We talk about business management and leadership, the history of design and digital marketing, and the different agency models you can choose. Hope you enjoy.
Yeah,
Again, I pretty
yeah.
much would give an
So
intro beforehand, but let's hear it from your mouth.
yeah, no problem. Um, so Don Elliot. I've been in the creative industry, marketing industry since '97, so about a little over 25 years now. Um, I started my first agency in 2003 with a couple partners. I sold that in 2007. Started a second agency in 2008. I sold that to Gravitate in 2012. And then I actually came back and bought Gravitate in 2020, 2 weeks before quarantine.
Right.
So that's that's my professional history in a nutshell. I've been a business owner and manager and leader since 2003, so about 20 years now, and still constantly learning, still constantly making mistakes. But I love the industry.
All right. A kind of question or a doubt is when you did buy back the company, how exactly did you feel? I mean, there must be some kind of, satisfaction that, you've got back your company.
Yeah, actually, it was really wonderful coming back. The previous owners and I weren't really on the same page as far as where to take the company. There was nothing contentious, but just where to go with the company.
Right.
So in 2016, I left to do consulting for other agencies, so no employees, just consulting.
Right.
Um, and unfortunately for Gravitate, they went through a really rough time after that, and that put it in a position where I had had enough of a break doing the consulting work. So I was kind of ready to get back in the saddle, and they were in a position for me to come buy it. So it was really exciting. About maybe a third of the employees, a quarter to a third of the employees were working with me before when I was running the company. So it was kind of a fun homecoming, but
Yeah.
also the company had evolved in those 4 years. And so it was really fun to see what they had improved, what they had changed, and how the culture had not just continued, but it really strengthened during those 4 years. So there's one funny thing that happened is I'm absolutely a whiteboard person. I need whiteboard to think. And so when they showed me the new office, which isn't this one, this is our new office.
Okay.
That was a temporary office before, but there was whiteboards everywhere. The counters were whiteboards,
Oh,
and
must
they
have
were
been
so
helpful.
happy to take me around to
Yeah.
say, yeah, look at this whiteboard over here. So it was kind of fun.
All right. Kind of a little, again, another doubt was you mentioned that you, I think, started it or had sold it back in 2007, 2008. So I believe around that time was the first kind of recession as well, right?
That was actually my second. So
Right.
the first one was I started the first agency right at like the depths, the bottom of the curve for the .com bubble burst.
Yeah.
And then the second one was 2008. Yeah.
Okay. So the kind of question that I was leading up to was not really the dot-com bubble, but more of how did processes and things change within the company in the time of your absence? Was it a lot of, let's say, leadership and management you had to do when you came back?
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, yeah. So after I left, they had gone through a couple different choices of presidents that really didn't work out, and so that was a pretty big blow to the culture. It was a blow to the income for the company, and so they at the previous owners kind of almost sort of were like throwing their hands up in the air. They're like, we don't know what to do. This company's difficult. Agencies are difficult. So they promoted some of the folks within the team to stronger executive leadership positions.
Right.
And one in particular, Colton Tidwell, took over as the president. And they basically turned the company around because it was in a spiral.
Right.
And they turned it around by really focusing on culture, really focusing on valuing the employees. And they kept a strong focus on process as well. So we're very process driven. So they, I think it was really, I wasn't here. So if I had to sum it up for them from what they've said, I think it was the embracing culture and really valuing people, and really trying to create a great place to come and work. Whereas previously it was really a lot more about just the profit.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a disconnect, I think.
I think technically we kind of had a recent call about the same topic as well, where we kind of learned that any kind of CEO or C-level suite person won't really get the results they're looking for if they're going to lead from behind with the whip kind of mentality. But by empowering their
Yeah.
own team, they can actually start raising up their, level of standards.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. One of our philosophies that I talk about a lot is we work real hard to hire the right person. We have a pretty stringent or pretty involved interview process. So once we hire the right person, we want to give them just enough structure so that they know what they need to do and they have a purpose, a meaning for being in the company, and then get the hell out of their way. Let them do their job.
right,
I think a lot of managers are so concerned about failure and they need perfection so much that a lot of fear can drive owners or managers to inadvertently not trust their employees, or at least not demonstrate trust. And the thing is, if you hire the right person and they have clarity on what they need to accomplish, 99% of the time they're gonna work hard to make that happen, because people is in our industry in particular, any real professional industry, most people want to do good work. They want to look back at the end of the day and say, wow, I accomplished all that. So so if you let them do that, they'll put more passion into it, they'll bring more ideas, they'll bring ideas that you didn't have. And you see a lot of problems start to go out the window when people have the ability to affect, their own.
you've had experience in the field for around 25 years. Is it safe to assume that in those 25 years you've also been leading, or was it about a little bit less than that as well?
Um, yeah, it's pretty much always leading, always from the either chief operations officer or president, CEO, since at least since 2003. 97 to 2003, there was some consulting mixed in there, and basically it was largely in nonprofits at that point. And so I was helping to run some nonprofits, and then that brought me into marketing because that's really where they struggled the most. So then I went into consulting for a little bit, and then some partners and I decided to start an agency.
Right, right. Two things. One, I don't know what you're talking about. You don't look a day over 30, so I don't believe this. You were working in 97. No. The second part of it
I
technically
appreciate that.
is no worries. The second part of it was that since you've been in the industry for such a long time, what are two things? What are some traits of a successful leader that you would, let's say that you would embody, and what are, let's say, some of the pros and cons and tips that you can give other people? Well, not pros and cons, more just tips you can give other people.
Yeah, if I had to distill it down to the simplest, I think a strong leader needs to be transparent, both in the business and in themselves. And I don't mean oversharing, but I mean being able to demonstrate when you're not sure if you're right, or being able to demonstrate when you're uncomfortable about something or even nervous about something.
Right.
There's a balancing act with that to a degree. If the company's going through a rough time, I like to be transparent about that, but I also don't want to be the sky is falling guy, because the last thing you want is for employees to be worried about the business instead of their work. So transparency, I think, is really important. That builds trust. And compassion. We talk about direct but compassionate communication. So if there's a problem, a leader should address it head on, quickly, and not shy away from it. But they also need to be compassionate in how they do it. Because I would say a number one thing for having a productive team is a team that trusts each other and trusts the management. And if they can trust the owner and the owners establish that, let me back up. One of the things that I say to, like, either if I'm teaching at a college or talking to peers, is that you can't demand trust or loyalty. That's something that has to be earned.
Right.
And I think a lot of businesses think, well, I hired you, So now you should be loyal to me and you should trust me. I see it the opposite. When you hire somebody, you're saying, I trust you and I'm going to trust you. But now you have to earn their loyalty. And you do that by building trust. You do that through honesty and transparency, and then compassion. But I also think there really is a third piece to that, which is vision. The CEO, the owner, they need to be a galvanizing force around vision. Here's where we're going as a company. This is who we are. This is what matters. And get people thinking about the big picture, imagining the possibilities. If it's just about the day-to-day grind, then your retention's not going to be as high. But if they see where they can go and they see where the company's going, then you feel like you're part of something bigger, something meaningful. And so you tend to stay in that company more and you invest more into that company because you see that your investment matters.
Is there,
So those three things.
let's say, a way where you can get everyone on the same page without, let's say, interacting with everyone? In the sense that, let's say, you do have a mission and vision. I think for most companies, and I think even schools as well, they pretty much have the mission and vision printed on their website or at least showcased somewhere or the other. So, is there any other way technically to get everyone in the company on the same page?
I think it comes down to I talk about leadership needs to be leadership by example. You need to demonstrate the behavior that you want others. So my job, I manage the executive team. So my job is to make sure that they understand the vision and that they're bought off on it. So they can ask questions about it. We talk about it on a regular basis. We talk about our values probably more than anything. And then if I've inspired them to believe in the vision and to trust, then they go and do the same thing for their team. And the way that can look is, sometimes it's a big speech in front of the whole staff. Most of the time where it really happens is when people go out to lunch together. And if you've done your job of helping people see clearly where the company's going or why the company matters, then at lunch they talk about it and they bring it up and they reinforce the vision. I personally feel values is more important than vision or mission as far as statements go.
Yeah.
Our values really are our vision. So our vision is a company of people who support each other. We do good work, and it's an enjoyable place to work. So expecting more, we have a staff of high performers. We have people who want to be high performers, and they don't like working alongside people who aren't pulling their weight or who are striving to be better. So expect more is a vision of being a constantly improving company. Do what's right. Same kind of thing there. The vision is to be a above board, truly having integrity within the industry. And so that value forces that vision. So you can kind of see the idea there for a vision statement. And we're actually working on revival right now. Okay. But for a vision statement, really refining it, I should say. I think it needs to be as simple as possible. And it needs to be wrapped around things that the employee cares about. So yes, part of my vision is to just make money. It's a for-profit company at the end of the day. So technically that's part of the vision. But why would an employee care about that? It doesn't matter to them if I make more money or not. Yeah. If they see that more profit means we can pay higher, we can pickier about clients, we can introduce better benefits, profit sharing goes up. When they see that, so profit equals a better life for me, the employee, not just Don.
The company.
So the vision really, in my opinion, really has to be about the employees and what is going to drive them forward. And to be honest with you, I've never been one to really dive into mission statements. I don't find a whole lot of value out of them, at least not in my management style. Yeah. So I think it can get kind of corporate-y. And the more things people have to think about, like, here's our vision, here's our mission, here's our values, here's our prop statement, here's our USP, it gets muddy and you don't feel like you're part of something bigger. It just feels more chaotic. Whereas if all you have to remember are these three values and where we're going as a company, the rest sort of naturally falls into place and it keeps them focused.
Another question in kind of relation to that, to kind of tie off the bow on this topic. I think I can switch to the agency one instead.
There.
Pretty much, since you mentioned the different models of agencies, what exactly is the one that you are currently following? Is it a full service one or like a boutique agency?
Yeah, so we're sort of in the middle. We say that we build and grow the digital ecosystem. So what that means is we handle most things types of digital marketing. We don't do certain things like organic social, but if it's dealing with paid advertising, SEO, then we handle that. If it's dealing with building websites, maintaining websites, hosting, CRO, any number of these activities, if it's dealing with digital marketing, then we probably do it. So in that sense, it's full service as far as it's full service digital marketing. And there's bleed over. So we do some branding because that's necessary for digital marketing or necessary for a new website. But if they need to do, a $30,000 branding project where you're doing all these interviews and stuff, generally then we bring in a part. Because I do think that on one end, the more specialized and focused you are, the more efficient you're going to be and arguably the more profitable you be as a company.
Yeah.
So I have a friend that has an agency and they focus solely on dentists and that's all they do. And they're excellent at it. Incredibly profitable, very efficient company. On the other end, you have full services where they're doing even more than we do. They're doing video work and photography and branding and poster design, the whole shebang. And that has its benefits in that you can get some pretty large engagements for that. But there's pros and cons to that to me. A lot of agencies have been laying people off lately because you have people like Adobe or tech companies pulling money. And if you've got a client that pays $50,000 a month, that's several employees worth of income.
Yeah.
And so if you lose that client, all of a sudden now you're like, shit, what do we do?
Yeah.
And so a lot of agencies go through this cycle of you hire a bunch of people to handle this Nike work, Nike pulls it later on, and now you got to lay people off. And so they do this thing. So I think the all things to all people agency model is starting to die out. I think I started seeing that maybe about 10 years ago. It began, and I think as of late, it's picked up a lot. Agencies are working with partners more often now instead of trying to do everything in-house. And I think that does come down to the old style of agencies, the Mad Men style, are cumbersome, they're hard to repeat, and they're very difficult to scale up. Whereas if you're efficient and really focused, then you can stabilize things more. You don't have all of this going on as much.
So what kind of, sorry to
I
cut
think
you
it's
off.
finding the right balance with it. What was that?
No, sorry to cut you off, but I was going to ask, what kind of tip would you suggest people who want to continue being a full service agency? And what would you kind of mention to them to kind of switch their way of thinking?
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, what would be the motives to be a full size or full service agency?
To not be a full service agency. Instead of being an agency that
Like
tries
what
to
would
do...
I say to someone?
Yeah.
So I think with a full service agency, you have the process for building a website versus branding versus a video shoot versus social media versus technical SEO versus technical hosting.
Right.
All of these things have very unique processes. And if you have a full service company that's maybe only 20 or 30 people, those people have to learn all these different processes. And so instead of being able to focus it on here's our website process and we're going to constantly iterate on it, constantly improve on it, make it more and more efficient. Instead of being able to do that, the person's just getting enough to get that process out, and then they got to jump to the other one to get that process out.
Right.
Now, if you have an agency that's 100 people, 200 people, being full service is much more realistic because you can have specialists in different departments. But the smaller your company is, the more hats each person has to wear. Yeah. And the more hats every hat that a person has to wear decreases efficiency because you have a transition cost. Just shifting your mindset from here to here takes time, takes energy, takes emotional durability. So full service, I generally see employee turnover is a lot higher in those models because it can feel chaotic. People who love it, though, they love the mess. They love that every new project, every new thing's going to be kind of figuring it out again, and that's exciting for some people. Right. But from a scalability standpoint, that's really difficult because each person you have to hire somebody who can handle all of that. Right. And then you have to hope that they stick around. Whereas for us, if we need to scale up, we need to hire this kind of specialist, and plug them in, and now we're good to go. Right. Does that make sense?
It does, but I have a counter to that. Let's see how the reply to that can go. Let's say I do have a full service agency, and I'm trying to mainly keep my employee count to like 20, maybe 30 people, or less, depending on, again, how much client work I'm getting. Would it be less chaotic if I kind of outsourced some of this work to, let's say, other agencies? Or does that not fall under full service agency after that?
I think that's a model. It's a difficult one to pull off. You have to put a lot of energy up front to make sure things are structured well and to have good partners. But we sort of do that. So if it's a larger branding project, if we need some video work done to push forward the digital marketing, then we don't white label anything. That's one option. I think white labeling can be tricky, but we'll say, Arcada Labs, this is our go-to for this type of thing. Lots of creatives, they're go-to for this. Hub is our go-to for this. And we bring them in, and sometimes it'll be a co-pitch. Sometimes we'll just say contract directly with the other people. For that model to work, and if you're doing it white label, where you're outsourcing, but the client doesn't necessarily know that, it comes down to, you have to acknowledge up front that you're going to have, it's not as easy as just having an employee do something, because that person has to be dialed into your processes, your systems, quality control over that person. You have less control because they're not your employee. So you have to have structure in place, and you have to know you're going to be spending some time managing these folks that is beyond what you would manage regular employees for. And if you can accept that cost, I've seen many agencies do the full service model, but they're really white labeling a whole bunch of other people, and they're almost like project management and client management facilitators. That can definitely work. I think where I see it fail is they don't recognize all the structure that has to go into place up front. You can't just lop things over the fence and expect it to be done to your standards. So it's tricky, but it can definitely work.
So what businesses or agencies would you recommend to take up the hybrid model?
What do you mean? How do you mean?
So let's say some companies want to continue doing their full service agency style, where they keep their employees out there and all the services that they take care of are done in-house. But if they want to reach out and do outsourcing as well, how do they kind of mix and match it to a point where they can have both of it at the same time, but not depending on one wholly over the other?
Yeah. So in my opinion, the in-house team should be the most skilled and the client-facing team. So they should be strategists, creative directors, this kind of thing. And then the outsourced team is very specialized. So you have, we have a guy named Prabhash. He's actually a full-time, but he's in India, so he's a contractor, but he's a full-time employee. But when we give him stuff to do, it's very much like, Pramash, here's the things that we're looking to do. He says, sweet, I got it. He dives in, he gets it done, and he kicks it back.
Right.
But if it's going to be, client facing, sitting down, hashing out strategy, that kind of thing, it gets more difficult, partially because of the time difference. That's one mechanical thing.
Right.
But because that person's not necessarily interacting on a regular basis, and Prabhash isn't a great example because he really does interact with us on a regular basis.
Right.
But the having some strategists that they're all employees, they get their head in, they collaborate, they're bouncing ideas back and forth. I think that's the leadership essentially that you need in-house. And then those people manage the outsourced teams. And so they need to be operating more like project managers and separating tasks. So for me, I really look at repeatable tasks, things that have to happen all the time. Grunt work is great for outsourcing, or just specifically skilled things. So like we do a lot of digital marketing audits where we just go in and look at the whole ecosystem for someone. So, Prabhash might take that on. It's this compartmentalized project. He knows exactly how to do it. He'll go in and get that done and then kick it back. Okay. So I think figuring out where that combo is, that they just have to understand you have to manage that outsourced team, and it takes more management than your in-house team. And that can be okay because of the cost savings you're getting.
Yeah, so I think I wouldn't say the ultimate question for this would be, would you advise people to take up the model, or would you prefer people choose based on their requirements?
I think it depends on what gets you up in the morning. So for me, I value stability and sort of freedom. So I like having where none of our clients take up more than 10% of our income. That way, if we lose a client, we don't have to worry about it. Or if we have a client that's just a pain and we want to let them go, we don't have to worry about it. So for me, those are some of the things I'm looking for in an agency. Right. Another agency I know that is full service, the owner there loves the energy. He loves just coming in, and there's always some new challenge, something falls apart, something's brilliant, and they love all of that. And so you want, as an owner, your experience in life to be that kind of thing, then a full service agency is really great for that. If you're looking more for stability and profit, then going more specialized. So in my case, it was somewhere in the middle because I do love the constant problem solving. I love the new challenges. We're always growing. But on the other end, I don't like the ups and downs of full service. And I don't like the lack of profit or less profitability that comes with it. So generally, I advise people to do the hybrid, like the middle, or go specialized. Okay. The advantage too of going specialized is you can expand. You can get really good at that and then say, now we're going to offer this. So at some point we'll offer organic social, most likely. At some point we'll do automation marketing. Yeah. But right now we don't want to add that stuff because those are their own processes, their own unique things. So we're keeping that outsourced to contractors.
And this is coming from the angle of, let's say, suggesting these tips to other agency owners, right? So from the angle from the client now, if let's say I'm a client who needs some requirements done, how would you advise me to choose which type of agency to go for?
Yeah, so that's a great question because that's a bit of a different answer. So the advantage of having a one-stop shop for your marketing is that there's not any he said, she said. So, for example, we'll do web development and not be allowed to host the site. And now a hosting company saying this and we're saying this, and the client's going, well, whose head do I chop for this? Like, this isn't work. So having one agency can help mitigate that. But that's really difficult to do these days. You really do have to build a team of multiple agencies. So I recommend to clients that they find a strong leadership agency, and usually that's got to be the digital marketing company, but it could be branding or something. But to recognize them as kind of your point person. And then the other agencies that you bring on have to collaborate with that agency. So you still have some leadership role in there. Otherwise, you need to be looking at having an internal marketing director or marketing manager who their job is to manage this outsourced team. This agency does this agency does this. That marketing manager is making sure everybody's communicating together. The advantage of having multiple agencies in that format is cost savings, because those agencies are more efficient, so their costs are usually better. And you don't have you have focus. So we know this agency is doing this, and we can hold them accountable to that. Versus if you have the one stop, and let's say they're not doing well on one particular thing, but they're doing great on everything else, what do you do now?
Right.
So I really prefer that hybrid model for most clients. If it's a small company, then going to the one-stop shop will work better. But when you're talking about a company who's got a marketing team internal of 5 to 50 people or what have you, they really need companies that can dig in deep and have some special.
How has the digital marketing industry evolved in the same time? Because you've had your toe in that for like a while as well. You've pretty much been seeing the growth and change like immediately.
Yeah, it's wild. And every year it changes, the rate of change increases. So in the beginning, we had, I remember where we would have a wall of keywords and text, and you'd make it the same color as the background so that the experience wasn't bad for the person, but you got the robots. And then Google said, no, we're going to penalize for that. So it's constantly, it's like a boxing match with Google, and you're constantly having to, juke and jive, and stay on your toes. So digital marketing agencies have to embrace the mindset of constant change, and they have to like it, because if you don't like it, you're going to get burnt out real quick. So some of the biggest changes that I saw, one was responsive design. So having a website adjust to the width of the browser versus having a separate mobile site. That was a huge shift. There's a couple of Google changes that over the years, I think, was it Hummingbird, I think was one major one. Panda was a pretty big one, if I remember right, where they started introducing natural language processing. They started making it even more focused on content.
Sorry to cut you off, but whenever I hear like a Google algorithm update, I get like a bit of trauma and like flashbacks from the SEO field of what happened during that time. But yeah, sorry.
It was wild. And so I think the one thing that's been consistent for digital marketing is content. Quality content still matters more than anything. Now, we can get into it at some point, but this AI wave that's coming, I think this is turning everything on its head. And I think content's going to start looking different. I think volume of content might start being penalized. Quality of content, original thoughts are really what's going to matter. So we could be scared about the AI. We could try and resist it, or we can say, look, this is just the next evolution, and it's going to be a constant evolution. Get on board, figure it out. I'd say that's the content being king or queen, but understanding all the technical execution, keywords, even the way you write content, that's going to shift almost monthly sometimes these days.
Okay, I mean, we kind of are talking about it, so I'll just throw a really quick question in there. We've had people give out their predictions for the previous years, and then when we got on a call with them, for the more recent podcast, we asked them what their predictions were for 2023 and beyond. So I think you do have a good understanding of the past, but the question is, what do you think is going to be in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, I'll start it by saying this more than any time in my career, I feel like I'm not totally sure where it's going. I've always had a pretty good beat on it. We've always been ahead of the curve. And we're trying to stay ahead of the curve right now. But what's happened is, if AI, the way it's at right now, ChatGPT in particular, but just the AI era that we're coming into, If that had been a slow rollout over the course of 2 years, it'd be a lot easier to predict where it's going. The fact that this has been like a 6 month, sudden upshift, in particular in content, makes it really questioning. So where I will say that I feel pretty confident it's going to go is Google, Bing, they're going to be using AI for, kind of like you see with ChatGPT right now, where you type something in and it gives you an answer that's compiled from other things. So if you want to affect those answers, the content you bring needs to be higher quality than previous, and you need to have some original thought. So I think a lot of the listicles, I think are going to they're still going to be effective as far as getting readers to read them, but I think it's going to be less effective from an SEO standpoint because the content's not as valuable as it's coming out there that already says the same thing. Now, I do believe, because search is so important for both of these, I do believe that they're probably going to introduce something along the lines of, here's your answer, and here's 3 reference sources for it. Right. So 3 websites you can click that are, references for this. I see that being entirely likely. But where I think mostly what's going to happen is this is going to put...
Sorry.
What was that?
I said, I think they're currently doing that with Bing Chat. Pretty much anything that you do ask, will give you the source as well.
Yeah, exactly. So they're already going that direction. I think they're going to continue that. I'd be surprised if they change that. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, this is just going to make advertising more important. I think it's going to be harder and harder to cut through with SEO, and advertising is going to become even more important, which for the client is unfortunate because that means the cost of advertising is going to go up because it'll be more competitive. From an agency standpoint, if you focus on advertising, this could be a really good thing for us. So that's what big. Now that I'm saying, like within a year, probably 5 years out, I could confidently say I have no idea at this point.
Yeah, the things that
but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I feel like most people we've had this conversation with are very clear that what's going on right now, but in the next year or so, everyone's been like, we really don't know. I didn't think I would be able to pump out 20 articles in like an hour or so.
Yeah, we're embracing AI backed, so or human backed, you can call it either way, for clients that we want to do higher volume, and we're pitching them that, and so we're jumping on that already. But for example, on the book side, so authors, there's a independent publishing company that publishes a few hundred books a year. Well, there's people doing actual full novels with ChatGPT, and you don't just put it in and bust out a novel. You have to build it through Chat. But
guilty as charged.
Their goal for what's that?
I said guilty as charged. Yeah. I've also tried writing a book through ChatGPT.
Yeah. And there's a skill coming out for it. There is creativity in it. But their goal for 2024 is to produce 10,000 books. And that's up from a few hundred. Yeah. And that's just one company. So Amazon's going to be flooded with books. So how is an author like me, shine through on that? It's difficult. It's still going to be advertised, and that's one thing is you can produce 10,000 books, but you still have to do advertising behind them. And AI is not making advertising more scalable. It's helping it be more accurate potentially, but you're not going to be able to advertise faster than you can already. So
I think the doubt or question that I have is that if we are producing, let's say, a lot of books through AI, are we also marketing it as books written by AI?
So that's the big question. There's a lot of people who are saying that's ethical. You should be citing that. Yeah. There's talk about how do you have like a certification that shows this is human created. The problem is Chat itself, and there's all kinds of other ones spinning up. ChatGPT itself is already almost undetectable by AI detectors. Right. In a couple of months, the next version that comes out, it'll be undetectable. People are, really believe that there's going to be AI detectors. It's absolutely not going to be there. They're already becoming obsolete. they'll be gone in a few months.
Yeah.
So enforcing it, I think, is where it comes down to it. You're going to have people producing a ton of AI. I've heard somebody call it the tsunami of crap that we're going to have to deal with.
Accurate.
And that's where I think Google will start saying, and Bing will start saying, we're not so concerned about volume anymore. It's cool that you produce 100 blog posts a week, but you're a digital marketing company. You're not a media company. You're not New York Times. So we're going to say, we're not going to accept your tsunami of crap. You got to write some longer form, bring some more thought leadership to fresh ideas.
But to kind of, let's say, counter that, and I'm not an AI professional, but if you did ask ChatGPT to write it in that tone and to add long form content, and you're constantly going back and forth, chatting to ChatGPT to give you what Google will, well, essentially love, then will Google have an issue with it if you do 80 to 90% of AI content?
I think Google won't be able to start to see the difference within a couple months. And so I think at the end of the day, Google will show you, there's tools where Google itself will say, here's questions around that topic that people aren't answering very well yet. And so Google still at the end of the day is going to want the most accurate, the most accurate and robust answers that they can provide, whether it's AI driven or not. I think the other part of that, though, is that so far with AI, it doesn't generate new ideas. All it can do is curate existing ones.
Yeah.
So if we have this thing that we're working on called an efficiency model of how to handle time tracking, things like this. And it's very different. It's similar to what manufacturing companies do, but it's very different for agencies. If you try to Google it, you're not going to find anything.
Right.
If you try to piece together this idea, you're going to have a whole bunch of different articles. But once we publish this and get it out there, which is going to be a little while, but once we do, that will start to rank for things like how to make my agency more efficient. Because Google will say, okay, that content's different than all the rest of the content that we've digested. That's a new thing. And so that is more likely to cut through.
But what if the idea comes from the human, but the content part of it is still created or at least organized through ChatGPT? Wouldn't Google still be like,
Yeah, I think that's fine.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen. I think prompters or prompt engineers or whatever the title ends up being, I think that's a skill and probably even an art to it. So it could be something like I come up with some idea and then we have a writer go and do the draft in AI, and then I come in and edit or make it sound more like my voice. I can absolutely see that. You're still bringing a fresh idea to the table.
Yeah.
It's just you've had another author assist you in it, that author.
If the idea or the content or anything technically came from a human or AI machine, as long as Google is
I don't
happy.
think it matters.
All right.
I don't think it'll matter to Google.
So then the question,
Like I said, I don't think Google will even be able to tell the difference.
right, so
I think as far as Google's concerned, it's going to say, this is now just content. I don't know if it's AI or not, and it doesn't matter anymore.
but users are clicking it, so I'm going to rank it up.
Right.
So then the question comes back to what we talked about earlier, ethicality. So is it fine?
So the ethic conversation is really interesting to me. You've got a few sides to it. On one side, you have, well, there's stealing or there's plagiarism. I kind of reject that argument because all of us are influenced by, if I'm an artist, I'm influenced by, who knows, Banksy. And those ideas are in my head. Now I come up with what I feel is an original idea, but it's the amalgamation of all the things I've experienced, all the things that I've looked at online, all the other artists who have impacted me. So I don't see this as having an ethical issue with that. I think it's ethical to say if this something is generated by AI or backed by AI in particular right now. That might change in the future, but right now I think that would be considered ethical, because otherwise there's going to be an assumption that a human was behind that. Most of the time you're just going to assume that's a human behind it. And I think that that's sort of Well, I'm going to back up a little bit on that and talk about ghostwriters.
Oh,
So I don't think ghostwriters are unethical. You have, Bill Clinton worked with James Patterson on a book. Clinton didn't write that. Now, and in fact, James Patterson didn't even really write most of that. He's got a stable of authors that do ghostwriting. And that's their job. And so on one end, AI to me is a ghostwriter. And so I don't see any ethical issue with that. Now, if you start having it be like, I'm in Mid-Journey and I say, create this artwork based on, I don't know, Van Gogh. Well, let's do Banksy again because he's still alive.
yeah.
Well, that is kind of thieving to me, or it is a little bit plagiarism because it's if there wasn't AI, it would be me, the painter, taking his painting and recreating it, or trying to do something identical, almost identical, without their permission. I think that's an ethical gray area. If ChatGPT say to write it in the voice of this person, I think that's stealing from that person. It's stealing their ideas, it's stealing their voice, and you're using it for yourself. I think whether AI does that or the person does that, I think that's unethical or at best
In the initial call that we had, we kind of assumed you were a UX pro. I think that's why we kind of added that in the questions. So user experience is something that Google and other search engines are keeping a close eye on. How do you feel that design and development will impact that SEO?
Yeah. So in the entire industry, design's probably what's changed the least in regards to actual execution. What you can do in Photoshop and Illustrator is incrementally better than it was before. It hasn't been flipped on its head. Development, digital marketing changes weekly. So that's a much more, and I think the reason for that is that the design principles that work now worked 500 years ago too. And so there's sort of a really established thing there, whereas digital marketing and development are very new things to humanity, and very new technology. So with design, some of the changes, the biggest one for sure was responsive design.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest change in design since the internet began. Another really big one is going from what they call skeuomorphic design to flat design. So skeuomorphic was, the idea of skeuomorphic is you're trying to recreate the real world in a new medium. So you might have wood texture or brushed steel or something that was really popular back then.
Thanks for explaining
And
it. I knew that. It was more for the listeners to understand that. I, of course, knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, carry on.
And then flat design, that was, and Microsoft and Google actually largely did that. Apple wasn't the cutting edge on this one. They embraced Pat. Google had their what they called material design, and the idea of flat design is that you're embracing the medium that's there. You've got a flat screen, you're embracing it. You're not trying to pretend that it's wood, but you still apply certain physical elements to it because there is a physical interaction. So a button might have a real subtle drop shaft, and when you hover over it, the drop shaft gets bigger or smaller depending on your preference. So you still have physical cues that sort of remind you how to operate a thing. But flat design from an aesthetic standpoint was a huge change.
Right.
Functionally, responsive design, I think, was the biggest change. But SEO development and design really play together a lot now. You hear about CRO, or conversion rate optimization. That's really the amalgamation of all these different skills.
Right.
So CRO might be, is the page loading fast enough? It might be, do these colors work? It might be, does this content make sense? It might be, are we even targeting the right keywords? So every discipline gets involved in that. And most of the time what we see that, I would say probably the majority of the time with CRO it comes down to design and user experience.
Right.
And so designs become even more UX focused than it used to be. But it's being driven by data more than it used to be. It used to be more intuition.
Right.
I think as a result, you're seeing on one end, you're seeing websites being a little more similar. Websites used to have a lot more variations, a lot more difference, and now you're getting some pretty standard, like you are going to have navigation in one of these three ways.
Yeah.
You are going to have a page that scrolls like this. Because those UX standards have risen and been identified, best practices, and then validated by data. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and come up with some new, fresh navigation all the time, we're looking at what's the best navigation to drive the result.
Right.
And so design is less focused on aesthetics than it used to be. It's still important, of course, but more focused on results and how do you get somebody from here to there. And that's where the data comes in.
So if, let's say, there are standards in the design that we're looking for, what are some of the tips that you can tell, let's say, other agencies to go above and beyond that standard? Or how can they get above that standard?
Yeah, I think gotta embrace the cross section of art and science, where so often designers and data scientists or SEO folks are operating in silos. And I'd say most often what I see is that the designer doesn't necessarily value what that person's bringing, what the analyst is bringing. It's not that they don't value that person. They just don't see how it's going to affect their design in any positive way. The other side, the analyst, the SEO person, more often recognizes the importance of design. So what I find is there has to be work on helping the designer understand this data can change your user experience and your user will experience your design better.
Yeah.
So culturally helping everybody understand that data matters, but the art still matters. The gut of, the data says this, we can approach it 7 different ways. I've been a designer for 10 years. I've known this client for a year. My gut says we should try this. Yeah. And then we'll use data to validate it. But it's those silos and getting everybody on the page and getting designers to where they're not looking at the data as a restriction, but instead it's an inspiration.
Okay. You being a fiction writer, dungeon master, and Scotch connoisseur,
yeah.
I'm more focused on the dungeon master part. This actually might not be that person actually, but do you feel being a dungeon master has helped you lead your company in any way? Not lead, but perhaps provide some problems and solving solutions for them.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I think, so I started playing D&D when I was a kid. And what I loved about it is it's basically interactive storytelling. Yeah. The dungeon master has the script and is the narrator, but once people start interacting, the dungeon master has no idea what they're going to do, and you have to improv around it. And I think from a leadership standpoint, a dungeon master learns to be comfortable with the unpredictability of their players. Right. And I'm comfortable with my staff going a little rogue. I'm comfortable with them trying something new without asking permission and it failing and that being okay. So I think a dungeon master enjoys being able to bring vision and focus, but they also enjoy just watching people do their own thing and they become comfortable with it. Yeah. Dungeon masters who aren't comfortable with that aren't fun to play with because they keep trying to force it back into the story. You don't get to go do your silliness.
You're pretty much laying out a roadmap for them to follow on their own. I think that's pretty much how a leader should kind of do it. Did you get some of this from your time as a director producer for the improv comedy show?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the most impactful things in how I operate as a professional, as a leader. What improv does is it helps you be comfortable with the unpredictability of things. There's this story. We did a very large website project for a credit union, a pretty large credit union here in Washington. And we were presenting designs and strategy, the first round of it. So we were up there at their headquarters and we're in a boardroom and there's 20-something people in there. And I'm sitting at the head of the table and there's these rows of people and they're all, VPs and just real established professionals. I'm presenting, everything's going well, and all of a sudden this guy walks in the door. He's about 6'3", maybe in his 60s, and he's holding an iPad up like this with the camera pointed at me. He just walks in the room filming me. So I kind of ignored him at first because I was waiting for him to say something. I just continued the presentation, but he didn't say anything. And so finally I stopped and I said, you've got to be the CEO. And everyone started laughing. And I said, there's no way somebody's walking into a meeting like this with an iPad pointed at me who's not the boss. And so he cracked up about that. And he said, I'm just testing you. I'm going to keep it up. And I said, fine, let's do this. Right. And all of that was the comfortability of being able to be on stage. Right. And so I delivered the presentation. The CEO president was so stoked about how I responded to the camera, because he was trying to throw me off, that he shared it with his whole staff, with the bank. Nice. So I think improv allows you to work with clients better. It allows you to work with people better. The rule of improv is that everything's yes, essentially. Yes, so if I say there's a tiger in the room, then I have to, if someone else says there's a tiger, I have to accept that there's a tiger in the room. I don't just get to say, no, there's not. Because that just ends the improv.
Thanks for watching that episode. I hope you enjoyed. For more videos like this, make sure you like and subscribe.